Good morning. It's nice to see that not too many of you wound up having to sleep late this morning for last night's festivities. This morning we're going to be talking about data, and we're going to be talking about how you can gather and use data in not only traditional and expected ways, but maybe even in some new and different ways. And as one of our panelists put it in his slide, how data is really an opportunity to rethink what a publisher does. It's not just an opportunity necessarily for incremental income or to be more efficient. And so this morning we're going to start with David Hutchinson from the BMJ, and he's going to talk to us about getting started and what you need to do to start building a data capability. Then Letty is going to talk to us about evaluation and how you can, the success metrics, and how you can see if your data program is doing what you need it to do and having impact. And finally, Chris is going to discuss some examples. He's going to show you some of the things that his organization has done. And I will let them introduce themselves. But also, one thing to keep in mind is as you're listening to this, we would really love to hear your data stories as well. So please be organizing maybe 30 seconds, a minute in your head, and please share what your organization might be doing with data, because there's a whole lot of knowledge and experience that is not up here that we'd like everybody to get to hear from as well. Thanks.
Morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm just making sure I've got a timer on my phone. I do have a tendency to go on, and let me know if I have done that. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to sharing BMJ's experience of how we have approached as an organization harvesting and analyzing data. Just a little bit about myself. I've been at BMJ for 6 years. I head up the data and analysis team. Prior to that, I was at Oxford University Press, where I was in the global academic business, in the marketing data and analysis team. But I've been working in data for over 20 years, and I started in a very un-GDPR-like fashion, keying data from a telephone directory into a spreadsheet so that non-spam phone calls could be made to farmers in the West Country. But anyway, we all have to start somewhere. So I guess really what I want to talk about is BMJ's approach. And I thought what I'd start with is talk about why would we want to harvest and analyze data. And I think for me, that's really about how do we add value to an organization. And value can be added in one of three ways for me around data. So the first area, obviously, I'm sure everyone both in the EU and beyond is aware of GDPR. Managing risks around data is really important. The second area is that we can minimize waste when we're working with data. So we can ensure that people aren't wasting time doing fairly mundane jobs or jobs that are prone to error. But then the third area that's probably of most interest to an organization is around generating revenue. And that revenue can be, for me, is how do we make good decisions in business. So BMJ's data strategy is to enable the organization to make good business decisions. And that is about our products, our customers, and our users. But in doing that, we want people, the way we serve that information needs to be built on trusted data, and we want that to be data that it can be delivered quickly. So the way we started was we started with a plan. We needed a plan to start with. And what we wanted to do was about 4 or 5 years ago, we were looking at how could we use information to make decisions. And we found we were in a fairly difficult position. We weren't doing that effectively. So our process was to use an industry standard model around information governance. And we engaged with some consultants who came in and looked at us as a business. And what came out of that consultancy was a couple of things. First, we were plotted on this maturity curve. And when we started, and I think whenever you start realizing you've got a problem, when you start to benchmark yourself, you find yourself low down on the scores. So to be honest, we were down here. I'm not going to tell you exactly where. People don't need to know that. But what the consultants then did was that we were scored. I think I can go on a bit longer than that, hopefully. We were scored, given an overall score, but that score was measured on 6 facets. And those facets were around compliance, measurement, people and organization, process and practice, strategy and policy, and technology. And that sort of formed the core areas that we were benchmarked on our data governance capability. What we then did was work both with the consultants and with a lot of stakeholders across the business to put together a series of plans, or an overall plan and then some annual rolling plans about how we could achieve our KPI in 3 years. So when we started in sort of 2013, 2014, we said we wanted to get to an overall stage of proactive. And we started to work on that. And the good news is, from my perspective, and perhaps why I'm here today, is that we reached that KPI. We reached it a year early. And we're now at a stage somewhere between 3 and 4. I don't think we're quite fully at the managed stage, but we're very close. And I think for an organization at BMJ's scale, that's a pretty good place to be. And what I would say is, I feel as a data function, we are now focusing on information development. So we built, or the strategy relies on 3 main pillars, really. The first of those is data compliance. This is more than just ticking boxes. I think doing compliance well does several things. Firstly, it builds trust, importantly, with customers, our users. Also importantly, it builds trust internally. And when I'm going to the executive committee, to the financial director, the chief operating officer, if they trust what we're doing, think that we're not going to be a compliance risk, it does make it easier to win approval for the investments that we want. I think the other area that compliance can really help is actually around some of the technical demands of GDPR, so privacy impact assessments and data protection impact assessments. Undertaking those before you start a data project can really help. It makes sure you've got your thinking out in place. And often we all learn by experience and mistakes, but we did have on one project an issue where we'd started and delivered, but then found at the point of delivery to the market, we didn't actually have the right permissions to run the project. Running a privacy impact assessment flushes out some of those compliance demands and actually helps delivery run more effectively. I think everyone's familiar with the data axiom of good in, good out, or garbage in, garbage out. We want to deliver trusted data to the business. When we're asking people to make decisions or to use the information products that we deliver, it's really important that they trust that data. That means that we need to understand how that data works, and also that what we're saying the data tells people actually is that case. So in BMJ's case, around managing data quality, a lot of this is around mapping out our processes. How can we make data travel smoothly from our source systems into a warehouse, out of a warehouse into a reporting platform, and then out to the users who want to consume that information. So we have focused a lot on our processes. Having good processes minimizes waste. It allows us to do things quickly and at speed, and it ensures that we're able to do some of the things we want. We were also in a challenging position. Some of our platforms, we've had a data strategy really for 4 or 5 years. Some of our platforms, we've been gathering data for 20 years from some of the platforms, and there are legacy quality issues. So we focused a lot on trying to address the legacy, but really what we're aiming to do is to deliver root cause solutions to our data quality issues. And this again comes around to understanding your processes. How are you capturing data? What standards are you using? Wherever possible, we're trying to use standards to ensure we have clean data. Humans are great, but unfortunately, free text is really problematic for when it comes to sort of analyzing data. And then the final stage of the final pillar, or the third pillar really, is we want to be data capable. We have very intelligent, very bright people, very ambitious people who want to do some very ambitious things with data. In order to be able to do that, we need to have good compliance and good quality. But in terms of how BMJ's data capability has developed, we are now in a position where we are automating processes, but those automations are then being applied at the front end. So we have delivered successful automations to drive B2C free trial conversions to subscriptions to generate revenue. We are also now delivering information very quickly to users so that they can better understand their products. And we're entering into working for us with new types of data. We've typically relied on what I would call declared data. When somebody registers on a website and we gather that data or data coming in through our subscription systems. We now have access to much richer sets of data, which I would call behavioral data from digital interactions. But the scale and volume of those data sets presents new challenges to us. So what we're now working on is how can we use these much larger, much richer data sets to drive in-platform, in-product recommendations, as well as to deepen our understanding of users. So those are the three pillars of the strategy that we've implemented. In order to do this, when we got started, we had to build a data team. And I'd say we have data teams at BMJ in 3 levels. The first level is as a functional data team. And we're a team of 6, including myself. And within that team, we cover web and digital analytics, business intelligence delivery, CRM and single customer view delivery, as well as data quality management. We take a hub and spoke approach, so we are a center of excellence, and what we're doing is we are trying to enable other teams and other functions in BMJ to have access to data and information so they can consume that in the way that they need, so whether that's for reporting or whether that's for analysis. The second level of building a data team is, as a team of 6, the data function actually doesn't control all of the aspects of data management at BMJ. So we have what I would call a matrix. So to deliver good information, we have the data team. We also have a business systems team who handle our warehouse and some of the larger sort of enterprise level ETL processing. But we also have to have close relationships with the commercial operations team, as well as the publishing functions. And then the final level of building a data team is organizationally. At BMJ, as part of our annual review, every employee is measured against their capabilities, are measured in terms of data and digital capabilities. We need to ensure that, depending on the role and function people are in, that they have the right skill set. And in benchmarking that, we're able to then determine what learning and development is needed either individually at a team level or organizationally. And to give an example of that, we use Google Analytics. We use the free version for our web and digital analytics. And we have supported a lot of self-service training for individuals so that they are able to use a tool like Google Analytics effectively. And then very simply around, obviously, data does involve people, but it has to involve technology. If you looked at the technology that BMJ used 5 years ago and what we use now, we only use one different piece of kit. So we still have an Oracle data warehouse. We still have business objects. We still use Google Analytics in its free version. What we have done, though, is really looked at what does this technology enable us to do. We've tested the functionality to understand what it can do, how we can apply that to our use cases. As well as testing the functionality, what we've done is look to integrate the data so that we can move data from source systems through platforms and back into warehouses. And I think that focus on understanding the value you can get from what you already have and how you can make your systems talk to each other, it really does deliver progress. And I think very much at the key to that for an organization like BMJ is I would really recommend develop good relationships with your suppliers. Often your suppliers have a lot of expertise. So we've been very fortunate to work with some great suppliers. We've worked with Data Salon for over 10 years. Their knowledge of the academic publishing industry is something that benefits BMJ. And so we have close relationships with Data Salon, but also with our email service provider. It's an approach that I really recommend championing. And then finally, talking about harvesting and analyzing data, we want to turn data into information. One of the challenges on sort of a central data function is we might understand the platforms, what they can do. We might also understand the quality of the data, what the limitations of the data are. We're not experts in what our customers want, what our product development teams want. And again, talking about relationships with suppliers, it's really important to have good relationships with your business information consumers. Often the question is, okay, deliver us a report, what do you want? I don't know, or I want everything. And it's then in that conversation where you start to narrow down to work out, okay, well, this is what we're going to be able to do with what we've got now. We're going to have to go back and develop certain functions, new metrics, whatever it is. And with all of these things, I think sometimes there can be a tendency we're going to come in and we're going to change everything at once. Really start small. Our most effective thing was that had won a lot of credibility with the teams that consume our information, was to deliver a single report that worked well and met the user's requirements. That then gives you the buy-in to start developing more. Around transforming data into information, I do not want our data function to be a bottleneck. We cannot serve every analytical need, every reporting need. So we have looked wherever possible to deliver self-service, whether that's through Google Analytics, and as a Google Apps house, we have Google Sheets. That allows us to deliver a lot of information into Google Sheets. But we also use Business Objects, our reporting platform, to deliver information on demand to our users. So I'm just going to wrap up in a moment, but I wanted to give a sort of a worked example of how we've applied some of this theory into delivery. So this schematic starts with our source systems on the left, and this is an actual use case that we've applied. So we've taken data from our Salesforce system about customers and their subscriptions, from our Highwire platform for our journals usage, and also from another platform that we use for another product's usage for best practice. That's fed into the data warehouse. That's where the initial layer of conversion of the data to information happens, where we have data from being organized into objects around customers, subscriptions, and usage. Within the warehouse, we're then able to leverage that data to create something that doesn't exist. Fairly simple, cost per download. All done in the warehouse, all done on a regular basis, automatically. It's done by a team, two teams, someone in my team, the data quality analyst, but also another team, the business systems team. That data is then made available in Business Objects. When it's in Business Objects, we can use the same data to create different views, which enables us to serve different information products out to the users. And where that got to is something like this. Now, apologies, this was not our compliance officer saying, don't tell anybody anything, I've grayed out the metrics. But this is the first page in a report. We have a tendency to use acronyms, Judy, Journals Usage Dashboard for Institutions. But this report tells the story of 70 journals across 5 years from 3 million rows of data. This can be delivered to anyone. They can then drill into that, but they can get from this very high-level view down to an understanding to see the usage of every single customer in 3 clicks. I think it's this development story that shows what you can do when you get organized.
Good morning. Hi, everybody. I'm Letty Conrad, and I'm pleased to be part of this esteemed group. If I just keep clicking, everything will be okay, right? Thanks to Anne and to Pierre for inviting me. For those of you I haven't met, I am about 17 years or so into my career in professional and academic publishing, most of that time in digital content and product development. The last 5 to 10 years or so building up a specialty in the academic user experience and a researcher-centric approach to product R&D. And I get to do all of this from sunny Southern California, where it's nearing on 2 a.m. So bear with me as I work through the things I've prepared to share with you. I have some examples of putting data to work in my experience with various kinds of content providers and technology and service providers, specifically when looking to convert an existing business model or test the waters in a new revenue stream, or when attending to usage goals or the needs around optimizing product experience, and also when looking to improve usability and reader engagement. But first, building on what David demonstrated, I think it's important to understand that transforming data into information that we can use does require a bit of strategic thinking and a bit of investment in time and energy, if not tech. But it does not necessarily require rocket science. That's optional. And I do want to share my perspective with the caveat that I am not a data scientist, and that maybe only one of us is working toward that goal here, but that ultimately we are all working with data every day to make good decisions, of which I'm a big fan. So it's a matter really of working smarter with data, not necessarily building out a fancy set of software or specialized resources. So I'm hoping that your takeaways from this plenary will be really focused on how to put your data to work, and for all of us to make smart use of our energy and time with the data that we have. And there is quite a wondrous smorgasbord of data available to us already, if not those that we can build on when we think about a data-centric approach to doing our business. I think about internal resources such as where touch points exist between our stakeholders and our customers with our organizations. When I think about the publisher experience, of course, there's customer service records, although it's ideal to have a ticketing system or a CRM of sorts. I also think ad hoc tracking of experiences in our support teams is useful. We can simply count emails or meet regularly with those who are interacting with customers to build up insights into those opportunities as well as possible challenges. Of course, there's tracking feedback from sales teams and having insights into, say, geographical trends in sales, other data points that can help us understand risks and opportunities. There's market research findings. Of course, conducting that market research directly with stakeholders and users is ideal, but those elements of our organization where that activity is going on, that can be shared across various teams who will see that data and understand and use that data in different ways. Sort of building on that market research is also product testing and user experience testing. So leveraging those findings, whether you're doing that research or not, if it's going on elsewhere in your organization, it's useful to bring it into your view and apply it to the work that you have at hand. In thinking about sort of external sources, there are usage statistics. This is where sort of web analytics would come into play. We're tracking the customer journey or the end user journey, looking at metrics for the user experience, both our products as well as our rivals. There's loads of competitor data to harvest, I believe, whether looking at sales reporting or potentially SEO testing. There's quite a bit of external data points on competitors that can be brought in as well. But when making choices from the smorgasbord of data that's available to us, I often think about the benefits of both qualitative and quantitative data sets. Qualitative data points come from things like focus groups, advice from advisory boards, product analysis. These are excellent resources on a small scale, smaller data sets that allow us to confirm assumptions or potentially be alerted to risks or challenges before they become a problem. They can help us sort of be alerted to strategic areas that may need more attention, and provide a more nuanced view, perhaps, into the work at hand. There's also the quantitative data sets, of course, that can come from, say, customer surveys, sales reports, usage data, competitor research findings that may have begun as qualitative assessment, but those could be potentially quantified for numerical analysis. And we might find insights, of course, on a broader scale with quantitative data sets. And then the mashup of those can really, depending on the goal, can provide a mixed methods approach. And here's a couple of examples of what I mean. All of that may have sounded quite vague and broad, so let me bring that down to reality. There are several ways that we could measure the usability, for instance, of our publishing products. For example, measuring the degree to which a product is accessible, specifically for users with physical or cognitive disabilities, is an important topic for publishers to be zeroed in on and using data to measure. I think about qualitative metrics like end-user testing with disabled readers, watching how they navigate your product or other services, open web services. This can really open up opportunities for improving both content and the sort of delivery of that content. But there are also a number of programmatic tools available to us on the accessibility front. There are products such as those testing tools from the W3C and others that can scrape a site and evaluate where we're doing well and where the opportunities lie. And these two things can come together, both the qualitative and quantitative data points can come together to build up an accessibility roadmap where we can develop KPIs and continue to monitor progress toward developing more accessible content. Another evergreen question in our industry is, what is good usage? And for most of us, ensuring good discoverability of content is key to driving usage. And then when advising clients on how to get a good read on what good usage is and the performance of content discovery, I often look at qualitative measures such as conducting a heuristic analysis of a product's performance in both the institutional and open web environments, actually putting user goggles on and running through a series of search tests where you yourself can navigate that user experience and what it's like to jump from search results to content that solves the problem. There are also quantitative, of course, web analytics and other usage data on the quantitative side, such as rates of users being referred from other databases or discovery tools. And these can come together as what I call channel KPIs. These data points basically work together, both the qualitative and the quantitative, where we can assign scores or ratios of performance to help us measure the relative value of discoverability and usage coming from specific conduits of content discovery. This is an example from a recent project helping a publisher determine where their risks and opportunities were in the content discovery space and where they might enhance findability. We assigned scores. We developed search tests and assigned scores to each test. Was a user able to get from point A to point B through these various channels, conducting a similar search test against different databases? And then those kinds of tests can be replicated over time, and it not only builds up insight into where the opportunities are for investment, but also an ongoing method of measuring that performance. This is another way, and this may not be super easy to see from where you are, but another way that I've mashed up quantitative and qualitative data is in user journey diagrams. This is an example from a few years ago where we tabulated observations during a user research where we asked users to conduct search exercises, and we tabulated their journeys in a simple Excel macro, totally free, macro called a Sankey diagram. This is what they call an alluvial diagram, and it essentially helps us see where the high-level trends are in where users begin their search and where they end their search and all of the steps in between. So after watching these graduate students conduct those search tests, my research partner and I basically assigned a code to each step, and we were able to then pour that into this diagram, and this is interactive in real time, and we're able to see exactly where, for instance, folks were, where they began and where they ended with the most downloads, for instance, whether they started in their library or with Google or A&I resources. And this type of map, the reason I'm sharing it is I think it's a very powerful tool for evaluating where users might be getting stuck, where they typically conclude their journeys, where they find success in the process. And finally, a couple of recent lessons learned from work that I've been doing with a platform provider that's looking to extend a successful enterprise model with a new consumer option for individuals and for small groups. And I can't name names, but I can tell you that the project began by harvesting data from their existing enterprise sort of customer and sales data. We mashed that up with individual download activity, so we were able to kind of get a sense of what an individual ROI might look like in that journey. We also then compared the number of users in each of those institutions with their platform and subscription costs to start to get a ballpark figure for individual pricing. We then also went sort of beyond the data that we could see in usage and web analytics, and we ran a couple of small focus groups where we dug into customer perceptions of feature and service value. So we began to sort of flesh out where our priorities should be for an individual in developing an offering that would make sense for the individual researcher outside of the institutional context. And then finally, we evaluated rival pricing structures along with their value-added features and offers. So we created a matrix of cost per feature set. And that really helped us to get a sense of specifically where the values were according to the customers that we were talking to, how those prices lined up. And all of this came together to develop a beta cost and offering structure for flipping to a consumer model. And hopefully next year I can come back and tell you a bit more about how that all worked out. But for now, I will turn things over to Chris.
Thanks, Letty. And thank you, Anne, for inviting me here as well today to talk to you a little bit about the data harvesting and analytics operations we have going on at Emerald. So the emphasis here will be on some real-world applications, things that we could or are implementing right now. And I'll be talking about metadata, really, rather than the data within the articles itself. That's another talk for another day, a much longer day. So, just to get started, here's a little bit of visual metadata about myself. I was born in the northeast of England, went to university in Leeds, worked for a variety of open and closed subscription publishers, up until a couple of years ago when I joined Emerald. So Emerald, as some of you may well know, are a publisher. We specialize in several areas, but we're most well known for business management and economics research, but we also do computer science, health and social care. And about a year ago, maybe a year and a half, we redesigned our site, and in particular our homepage, and I'll come back to why we did that shortly, and also how we're using analytics to optimize the experience here. We're looking at kind of reinventing ourselves a little bit. We are very interested in how we can move along that curve. So you saw David mentioned about the operation of turning data into information. With my product hat on, I would say we're interested in turning information into knowledge. There's a fourth step, which is turning knowledge into wisdom, which, again, perhaps is out of scope for this morning. But at each step, we're using the data that we already have to inform how we progress along the way. So this is an opportunity for us. So there are obvious opportunities. There are opportunities to get to know the customers much better. We don't have to rely on qualitative interviews. We can see quantitatively what they're up to, which gives us an opportunity to tailor the content for individual users. Interestingly, it also gives us an opportunity to tailor products for librarians. And again, when we think about the data maturity curve we saw in David's slide, we're progressing up towards the middle part of that, where we can proactively spot and solve problems before they become problematic, if that isn't an oxymoron. But interestingly, the wider picture is, I think it gives us an opportunity to rethink what a publisher does. I think for some of us, for hundreds of years, it's been quite easy to take articles, review them, collate them into issues, and sell them on. I think for the next 100 years, that will continue, but will also be supplemented by a lot of other services around that. So will we be able to support researchers across the whole continuum from when they have the initial idea, hopefully, to the end of the process where it's having some real-world impact? And if you think about it, opportunities are almost infinite. So rather than look at all of them, I've decided to see if we can pick just 3 opportunities that, again, they're not in the realm of science fiction. They're things we could do very soon. For us, these are things that are happening now, things that we would like to do very shortly. And the third is something which is for the future. So right now, and an example you saw was with the platform redesign a year ago, we are using the data of a user journey throughout the site to gain insight into how they're interacting and to influence their behavior in an ethical way for maximum usage. Using the usage and turnaways to optimize product makeup for a librarian. And finally, using data about individuals to map their interests to other opportunities outside of the strict confines of publishing an article. So as a way of optimizing useful interactions on your site, and I apologize in advance because you won't be able to read any of this, so I'll talk you through it at a very high level. This is a very simple version of Letty's alluvial slide that she showed, which looked much nicer. I've also removed quite a few numbers from this as well, but very briefly, at the very top, we have the platform homepage, and we have 3 streams coming into our platform homepage. They are from the open web, although it says Google on there, if you can see that, because it is predominantly from Google and its Scholar variant. Library discovery services, and then the third one is people who have saved our site as a favorite or just typed in the URL into the browser bar. So when someone searches for an article on Google or Scholar or a library discovery service, they end up straight here on an article. When someone comes to us because they've typed in a URL, they come to the home page, and then they can go to a search box, or they can go to browse through a section. If they browse through a section, they can go to a journal homepage or a book homepage, and then they end up on an article or chapter. At each stage, you can see there's an arrow pointing off towards the right. These are the people who are exiting the site for various reasons. And obviously, as a publisher, we want people to be able to read the article that they're after. But then we're also interested in showing them additional content that they might like, and then additional further content that they might like. So for us, engagement could then be thought of as how can we prove that the site is engaging and worthwhile for a user by moving them on from the first thing they came to look at to a recommended article to something that was cited in the references from that second article, for example. And it's interesting because when you start to analyze the data that we had there, you would think that because 80% of our inbound traffic comes from Google, although that is a generalization, but a lot of it does come from their search engine, then you would think we should be optimizing our content so that it shows up highly in the Google search algorithm. But actually what happens is quite a lot of the people who come from the open web find that they don't have subscriptions or access to the full text. So actually they're only making it to, in a lot of cases, the first article, or the abstract, indeed, of the first article. Whereas the people who are coming from the library discovery services already have access. So their path from the first article to the second to the third is a lot smoother. So although on the face of things, it looked like we should be trying to optimize for search engines, what we really should be optimizing for is the library discovery services. And it's only when we made a diagram like this and then mapped it all out that we could see there was a big difference in the behavior of our users depending on where they originated from. So again, approaching data from a product side, how can we use it to optimize the usefulness of our product offering? So for many years, we've sold fixed content packages for a fixed time periods in all international markets. Library budgets are, as we all know, under strain. So how can we use data to demonstrate the value of what librarians are purchasing from us? So one commonly heard piece of feedback is that librarians want flexibility to define their own journal collections. So how can we address that? With data, of course. So something we're working on right now is a librarian can define with us a list of titles to which they think will match the needs of the users of their library and is affordable for them. So let's say that's 100 journal titles. Sorry, excuse me. And then every 6 or 12 months, we analyze the usage of this and investigate the bottom X%, perhaps let's call it 5%. But we also analyze the turnaways from unsubscribed titles, so people trying to access stuff that they don't have access to. And if there's scope for improving usage, we'll proactively suggest to the librarians that the titles in the bottom 5% are replaced with these alternative titles, which should match the needs of their patrons more closely. So what have we done with this simple use of data? We've made the librarians happy, we've made the users happy, and more importantly for my employees, we've made Emerald happy. So something which is perhaps a little further off, how to use data to look at researcher support beyond publishing. So I made some notes on this because I realize some of what I'm about to present may seem a little contentious. There's a lot of chatter on Twitter about publishers being able to access user journeys and user data through their platforms, and how anonymous this information is. If you knew exactly what Google knew about you, especially if you have an Android phone, you would not regard this as being a very serious issue, but there are sensitivities. So for now, I will say we are aware of that. But ethically implemented, this is a scenario which I can see happening fairly soon. So publishing is just one part, perhaps even a small part, of the research continuum. There's a lot of work which happens before an article is published. A lot of work happens after the article is published. Perhaps not as much as it should for the post-publication thing, but that's, again, another conversation. The researchers need to acquire funding, collaborators, and they also need to demonstrate the impact of what they have published. So how can we use data to match people to services for both pre-publication and for post-publication? So let's say we have an individual who has written 5 papers, and they can be classified using those phrases that you see on the screen there. Using that information, plus other openly available sources, such as ORCID, we can already build up a profile of this person which suggests she's based in Adelaide, has been publishing for the last 4 years, and has developed a niche in psychology and user behavior of online purchases in times of panic. Now, if you recall when I showed you those logos at the start of my talk, that was 5 or 6 logos of organizations I've been involved with in the past. You could probably already start to form a picture of my interests and my career to date. But this also does something similar. So what can we do with this? Perhaps I would rephrase that, what is possible to be done with this data? Again, bearing in mind ethical sensibilities. But we could match people with similar profiles. I've said here in terms of career length and subject matter, also in geography maybe as well, and people who have not been co-authors in the past. It might be interesting for that individual to apply for grants in this area with these individuals. And then we may also note that this person who has developed a niche in psychology and user behavior online purchases in times of panic has lower bibliometric figures than her peers. So maybe she needs to do some training on impact literacy to boost her own personal profile. And finally, I've ended up with a slide here which has the products that we sell used to be content. They are evolving, and they are being supplemented in many cases by data to make them smarter. Thank you very much.
So I think I'll kick off with one question, but if you do have questions or if you do have data use cases that you would like to share with the class, please get ready to do so. So one of the things I was thinking about as you're all talking is that using data is definitely a cultural change. A lot of people come from organizations, especially in and around product development, where it's been intuition that's really driven how they've formed products and how they've even assessed how well those products are doing. I think we can all think of pet projects and pet products and even publications that somebody just loves and it really isn't performing well. So I think the use of data in informing decision making is a bit of a cultural point as well. And so what I'd like to know is from the three of you, what kind of cultural impediments have you run into, and how have you dealt with and overcome them in the organizations that you've dealt with?
Wow, that's a big one.
Well, I need to give them time to think.
Well, unfortunately, I also need time to think.
Oh, then let me go first.
No.
I was going to say, one thing that struck me that I really liked about David's outline was the hands-on self-service piece. And I think if I'm a stakeholder with a pet product, and in the back of my mind I'm worried, or maybe I know it's not performing or it's not living up to our expectations, if I sit in a boardroom and have, maybe a data person or a product person show me some slides and present me with data, I'm still going to feel a little skeptical. But if I have an application where I can go in and play and ask those questions and dig around and really see it for myself, I think that self-service impact is really powerful.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think in terms of sort of overcoming cultural barriers, I think very lucky. I think working in the organisations I have done, particularly at BMJ, we're in evidence-based. We support evidence-based decision-making. It's one of our company values. I don't think there's been people who have barriers, but I think what has worked really well is when we've been able to work with, say, a product team to show how we can use data to tell a story that drives decision-making. That really helps. And by way of an example, for one of our products we were looking at on the e-commerce platform, they had a very high abandoned basket rate. What we wanted to do was to make various improvements to the user journey around B2C subscriptions. So the first thing we did was show them the evidence of what was happening, that over 90% of journeys were being abandoned. 90% is a very high number. The industry average that we were able to find out was 70. So 90% isn't necessarily that bad, but what we were then able to do, show the evidence, make changes, and by tracking, we created a daily feed of our e-commerce basket subscriptions. We were able then to see the impact of the various small changes to the product on the performance of that. What worked well, that then you have one very happy product manager, but we were able to then apply that to our other products and show that some products are okay, they were at the benchmark. For those that were above the benchmark, it's saying we want to do that and we can see that this can improve. So I think having the evidence showing what works then gets you the buy-in.
Showing them some results.
Yeah.
For sure.
So the other thing I would say is, as well, the data that we analyze is a proxy for what the user is up to. It's great to inform a decision, but it isn't always the case that the data should be leading you to make a decision. So there's always an element of qualitative investigation as well before we act on quantitative data to make sure that we are interpreting it correctly. So yeah, I would say it's informing our decisions rather than leading them.
That makes a lot of sense. I was recently in a class and they quoted George Box as saying, all models are wrong, but some are useful. But it's actually a really good way to look at data because data is never perfect. It's never perfect. And so it's all a question of developing the skills in teams to be able, and with subject matter experts, so it's that kind of that collaboration that you all talked about, to be able to understand where the imperfections might be and then to kind of compensate for those. So thinking of data as an asset, and we've talked a little bit through David's talk about investing in people, potentially even investing in technology. What are the kinds of investments that you feel a data asset requires on a regular basis or even on one time? Okay, I'm going. So, like, and I guess people, and you're talking about training and even having it on people's reviews. That's an excellent point of how to build things. What about supplemental data? Is there ever any time when you need to go out and get data to add to the data you have?
Yeah, look, there's a whole world of free open source data out there, as we've seen this week with Google highlighting the fact that there are many data sets we can use out there. I would say that there is very little integration right now with scholarly publishing platforms. It would be very interesting, I think, to link some semantic stores, semantic triple stores to the data within an academic publishing platform. So we can see as we travel from Emerald Insight to Wikipedia to the US meteorological data, for instance, what the pathway of that the data is that ended up with this academic article here. It's underutilized right now, but what I will say is I don't think we need to invest massively in terms of time or money in order to realize some fairly substantial benefits from analyzing what we already have. A lot of this is statistics, basically. It reminds me of a slide I saw fairly recently, which is a data scientist is just a statistician who lives in San Francisco. Apologies to any data scientists out there, or statisticians.
Or
indeed.
Californians.
Or Californians.
He's just apologizing to everyone.
Yeah, but I think there's a real 80-20 rule here that, you know, with 20% of effort, you can get pretty big bang for your buck. So I would say you don't have to invest heavily in time or money. Perhaps skills, training people up internally, but.
And walking before you run is important too.
Walking, indeed, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say around that, we all have a finite amount of resource. If you've got people who are doing tasks that can be automated, really, if you have people who are shifting files of data around, I think the opportunity is let's not employ people to do something that you can programatize. Have those focus that effort then on the higher value activities, from sort of data wrangling into looking at the data. And I very much so agree with Chris. It's not about data science always. It's, you know, some of this is about analytics, which I think we're all capable of. Some of this is not entry level, is not to sound patronizing, but we don't employ data scientists yet at BMJ, but we are having success by getting people to shift what they do with data.
I think the biggest sort of front-end investment is on time. You know, I agree with you, Chris. I think the 80-20 rule is absolutely applicable here, and that 20% of effort is where I think everyone should start. It's not a matter of running out and buying, you know, a new platform or new tools, or capturing every single point of data that you possibly can in hopes one day it will be useful.
And won't in most cases.
Right, and won't in most cases, but instead taking the time to look at the cultural sort of aspects of using data, to agree to some benchmarks, to get buy-in on using the right data to drive decisions, and then deciding what tech, resources, skills, et cetera, is needed to do that.
We're almost out of time. Questions?
Stories?
Stories? Oh, we'd love stories.
Observations.
Oh, over here?
Hi, it's Tasha Mellins-Byrne from the Microbiology Society. I was really surprised that none of you focused very much on financial data. So there was lots of talk of user data, there was lots of talk of information points, but very little about financial data, and I was wondering why that was.
Well, actually, it's part of our mission too. So one of the things that we asked everyone to speak about would be not so much the more common uses of financial data, but you were going to add to that too.
I would argue that subscriptions are financial data, so there's an element that did cover that. I think one of the sides is there's so many applications for data. Serving accountancy needs is quite a specific skill set. slightly outside of our expertise, but we do collaborate very closely with our finance team because they are very interested in the subscription performance of our customers and also interested in the usage. So yeah, there isn't detailed accountancy data. I'd say that's because it's outside of certainly our data function skill set.
Clarity, I was thinking more things like the actual cost per article through production. I think a lot of people within publishing teams don't necessarily know that by the time you've got an article through peer review and production, you have spent X £100 on services, people, tools, whatever. And that's information that we've been finding really useful in-house and didn't have until last year when I started insisting we produce it. I wonder how many publishing houses could benefit from that, potentially more the smaller ones than the larger ones who probably already have it.
And there are a lot of use cases for, if you think about data, I think you started out by saying there was efficiency, there was revenue generation, and there was the third one that I can't remember now, but there were three. But you're right, there are a lot of operational use cases, and they're even more about efficacy than efficiency. It's more about, not necessarily doing something in the least amount of time possible, but spending the right amount of time and doing the right things. So absolutely. There was a question up front.
Okay, Charles Hutchinson, I'm from University of Michigan, and I just wanted to bring up a slightly tangential use case, which is open access ebook usage data. And a book industry study group is working on this at the moment. But the big problem with that data is that most of it comes from platforms you do not control. So the issue there is how do you set up a good data trust? How do you set up a good governance model to allow competitors to actually submit that data into a central store? So just that whole can of worms before the break.
I might be able to talk to that a tiny bit, just because. So one of the things that we have at Delta Think is an open access data repository. A lot of it is based on public information, but a decent amount of it is based on private surveys of information from publishers that we keep confidential. And so it was a lot, reputational, just history or whatnot, to get people to trust us that we weren't going to provide their data to anyone else. But what we use their data for is to calibrate models. So we might calculate revenue for open access a certain way, but then we look at how the people in the market are reporting their own revenue against what we see as their volume, and we can see where the gaps are. So where, for example, there might be discounts and waivers or other things that are impacting the total revenue. So I think that kind of private curtain of trust is one way to get competitors to potentially participate if they can be assured that it's not going to hurt them in some fashion.